Hello, welcome to Kraftwerke. I hope this one is an interesting one. So this is all about trying to not recreate, but trying to get into that realm of the old mixes that were done on desks. I'm going to use the term analog sound, but I think you know what I mean by that. I'm not trying to recreate the Neve desk, but we do want to create that clarity and warmth and coloration that you get from some of the really lovely mixes from the late 70s, early 80s. Also some of the rock stuff that was done in the early 90s when there was still tape used. It was actually one of my favorite eras of recording for certain things, especially the guitar and the drum sounds. Thinking about things like Nevermind, for example, is a good example of what I'm getting at. So the idea of the video is to show you how, number one, if you do everything in the box, and even using a MIDI drums like Easy Drummer or Addictive Drums, as well as guitar sims, cab sims, amp sims, and all that kind of stuff, but still try and get to a certain warmth and analogy feel. Now again, by analog, I'll try and say this the last time, but by analog I just mean that it is not this harsh kind of too loud kind of mix that you hear now all the time. I also don't believe in mixing for modern equipment, because I think that the old mixes still sound good in modern equipment. What I mean by that is if you listen to it on earphones and all that kind of stuff on your iPhone, iPad, and all this kind of stuff, I can't understand how you would fix that. I can't imagine how you could solve that problem. If you mix for modern devices, or some idiot who stands by the bus station, you hear them all the time and they literally listen to their music through their phone speaker. I mean, you can't mix for that. I just don't see the point in mixing for that at all. And most stuff is going to play through that anyway, so and sound as shit as it does, even if you mixed for it. So the point is that I believe that you should mix for the best possible playback option. And if people want to listen to their music on shite devices, man, that's their problem, really is. And usually they sound good on that anyway. The alternative is that you have mixes for every single possible option. But I mean, think about it. The stuff everybody streams nowadays, you're going to have different versions of the same track on the streaming service, and then you're either going to have to choose, or maybe the device can be clever enough to pick the right one, tagging stuff with, okay, this is the iPhone mix, and this is the flippin' Samsung mix, and this is the inner ear mix, and this is the Beats headphone mix, and this is the fuck off, seriously. So I think that the best solution, this is obviously entirely my opinion, is to have a really good, clear, warm, good sounding mix for the optimum listening environment in stereo. And that also helps for other things like 5.1 and all that kind of thing, because actually most of these are, obviously you can mix for all the additional channels, but essentially what a lot of the 5.1s and 7.1s do is they take certain frequencies from certain things and they put them to the front to put them to the back. So if your mix is clear, really it should be okay for that as well. So I've got exactly the same tracks with exactly the same recordings, but two different versions of it. The one that's on the screen at the moment, Easy Drummer. I did do a lot of work on Easy Drums to get the drums to sound good. I tweaked a lot of the hits. I did a lot of work to try and make it sound as humanized as possible. I used the Nailx Crunchman and the Gerbert and my own IRs. If you like the sound of the guitars, the IRs are mine. You can find them on Kraftwerke.com. And I did a lot of things that I also did in the better version, because I didn't want to cheat. I didn't want to make this one quick and shit, and then the other one worked a lot on it. So I've done everything that I would have done to try and make the sound good and analog and all that. This was recorded in 48 kilohertz, 24-bit, like most people do. You don't really need to record higher than that, because you're not going to hear any higher than that anyway. But in the next version, I will get to that. So everything is still running. So when the track plays back, you can still hear Easy Drummer playing back the MIDI hits. You can still hear Nailx and the IRs working. And then I've got some channel emulators, some Neve and SSL emulators on the tracks to make them sound a bit warmer. Some desk EQ coloration and all this kind of, and a little bit of tape emulation. It's all running there to try and get to a certain level of good, nice colored sound mix. So let's listen to that for a second. I'll flick through a couple of sections. Heavier section. Softer section. Build up. So typical sounds fine. I've also, to kind of keep things right, I've done like a basic mastering on the master buzz. So just to bring levels up and do kind of a little bit of gluing, comping, master gluing, and a little bit of EQing. So, but otherwise kept it very simple, and but I did everything to try and make it sound decent. So before we go to the other one, I just want to show you, or just want to explain some of the problems I have with leaving it like this. Number one, the 48 kilohertz is fine, but in my experience and to my ears, the DAWs mix better on a higher resolution. So I put it over to 96 24-bit. There's a lot of things online which explain why you should mix and compress and EQ on higher resolutions unless you can unless you've got good comps and EQs which upsample during the mixing process. That's also okay, but generally it's better if you are mixing and mastering on higher bitrate. To my ears, it sounds as if the mix is more defined, clearer, more separated, and the comping and the gluing works better. It all kind of fits a little bit better. Personally, I'm not technically inclined with this sort of thing, what happens behind the scenes, but I've got a suspicion what happens is that because you've got more dots on your little waveforms, more bits to work with, the DAW can sum them better, has got more points to deal with to actually, you know, puzzle them all back together. Whereas if the less points there are, the more calculations it's got to do, and maybe that's a reason. I don't know why, but to my ears it definitely sounds better mixing at a higher comp. Now, to be fair, it was all recorded in 48 kilohertz, and then they were upsampled, and then the mixing is done in the upsampled version. So, but upsampling, you're not getting any detail back. You know, you're not getting anything that wasn't there before. You are literally just, in my opinion, you are just creating additional data points on the WAV file that helps the DAW process things. There's some good videos that explain why you should be EQing and comping at a higher bit rate, because if you don't, you create all sorts of ugly harmonics and additional harmonics which can build up. And that's obviously one of the reasons too why I think it sounds cleaner when you mix on a higher bit rate. So just to summarize, what was done here is that we've got everything recorded, cut up, level set, EQ'd, colored, all of that is done. But we're now going to go to the next one, and I truly believe that it sounds a lot better. While we're doing that, I'll explain my theory behind mixing. I think mixing should be something where you really try and bring forth what the instrument was trying to do, and you do that in a pleasing and an ear-pleasing way, and something that your brain can really understand. So, and then bring up the level so that it competes with other things, with other tracks, and being careful that you don't overblast it so you get that kind of ear fatigue listening to a track for too long. Anyway, so this is exactly the same, except that everything has been printed to its basics. So I stripped all the effects except obviously the amp simulation and stuff like that, but all the EQing, all the compression, reverb, all of that was stripped and then printed. So basically you could argue that was printed here was as if you recorded each of these instruments in real life with microphones, which then allows you to go into your DAW and start from scratch what a desk would do. The preamp, the EQ, the coloration of the EQ, the coloration of the compression, etc., etc., etc. The pushing the tape, etc., can all be done now, because what you're starting with is roughly the same as if, or at least theoretically the same as if you recorded it through mics. Now, obviously, the kind of mics that you use and the actual preamps that you use is not there, because it was all done through sims. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to recreate as much of the old process as possible, not to be nostalgic, but because we want to color the sound in a specific way. We want to color by comping and EQing through simulators of Neve desks or SSLs or whatever, through tape, through tube compression, etc. So we can make these choices now. We can say, well, what kind of preamp did we have on the drum mics? What kind of preamp did we have on the mics that mic the cab, etc., etc. Excuse me. So now we've got a lot more information to work with. As you can see, I've also separated out all the drums. So instead of using just the main Easy Drummer track, immediate track, which then buzzes out, I've actually separated each drum, so I can literally treat the whole drums as if I recorded them in a room with mics. And the reason you do that is absolutely necessary. The Easy Drummer and Addictive Drums and all these drum VSTs sound amazing, but they're contained. So they sound amazing, but when you start trying to put them into a mix, you cannot glue them properly. They sound great, but they just don't glue nicely with the rest of the tracks, because you cannot compress the different drums in a different way and sum them and compress the drum bus in the ways that you would otherwise. So for example, you need to treat the bass drum different from the snare drum, different from the overheads, different from the toms, etc., etc. So for example, here they're all separated out, the front, back of the bass of the kick. It is auxed and it is treated and compressed and channel stripped in its own way. It is then summed to the main drum the main drum master. Then you've got the snare again. It is summed towards a snare aux, and the snare aux is then summed towards the drum master. But that is done so that I can treat every single drum separately in the way that you would and you should treat them, and also the snare sum and the bass sum and the overhead sum, and all of that is treated in the way that it should. It's compressed and EQ'd. And because we've got them separated out and we are looking for a more analogue-y, warm tone, we can then apply to each of them, instead of just on the drum, on the buses, we can apply to each of them what the desk would color it. Because the thing is, what I notice people do now is they slam everything into a tape emulator, or they slam buses into a desk emulator. But actually, each track went through the desk and through its own channel strip, which colored it. So it wasn't just the buses that were colored, but it was each track that was colored. So you can now selectively choose which you're coloring and how much. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm compressing, EQing, doing all of that, which adds color by using specific compressors and desk emulators to color it. And then I've got the clean EQs and compressors that the transparent ones, the ones that don't color, the clean ones that come with your DAW. For example, I'm using Reaper, so these are the rear EQ and the rear comp. So I'm using them at the end to do the fine little bit of shaping where I still need to, but actually the main kind of pushing, EQing, compressing is all done with in mind of how they're going to color the sound and how it's going to be beneficial for the mix. So that's done on the drums. The same happened with the guitars. They were all printed. So what's now left is the printed version of the Nalex and the IRs. So it's not playing back the actual amp sum. It's actually playing the printed version of it. So it's basically treated as if we recorded the guitar and now we're playing back the audio. And again, there I have added certain things, certain buses to do certain things, to do a little bit of coloration, a bit of compression, and then obviously some overall EQ to shape it. And that has been done for the bass, and that has been done for the clean guitars as well. So the sound ends up very, very different, and in my opinion, much clearer and more pleasing to the ear. So go backwards and forwards and you'll see that there is a massive difference in the warmth and the clarity, yet they're still pretty much the same level. Last thought on this: if you have a well-balanced mix like this, where everything is nice and clear and sticking out where it should. Now, knowing that we've got some rudimentary mastering on the master bus and this is not a master track, we now have something that we can master or give to a mastering engineer that they can really work with. They don't have ugly, nasty sounds here and there. They've got a much more balanced overall mix that they can then work on. So from start to finish, it is a process which obviously takes a bit longer, but it allows more considered mixing. It allows for a much more clearer mix, and it also allows for much more balanced and pliable mix in the end. And because everything is nice and balanced, it should play back fairly well on most devices. Now, to me, this mix sounds okay in the headphones and also through the speakers. How it now translated through the recorder that I'm putting, I'm not 100% sure, but we're hoping for the best. Anyway, if there's any questions, let me know, and please support this kind of thing by subscribing, liking, sharing, and doing all that lovely stuff. So thank you very much. Oh, by the way, all of this was recorded with my, have a look at my previous videos. I went over my new little SG that I Frankensteined, but plays like a dream. I love the sound. So thank you very much. Till next time. Cheers.